Welcome back to our Mea campaign video. This will be our last Imperator video, then we'll go into Crusader Kings. I'm still kind of relatively new making videos, and this will be a summary of 46 hours of our campaign. A little bit longer than the previous videos, that were around 20 hours each into like 14 minutes videos. So if you enjoy or like this type of content or appreciate it, feel free to like and subscribe. And let's go into the video. Hello, let me tell you about my people, about my civilization. But let me first start with some wise words. We know absolute power can corrupt the best of people, but can absolute power corrupt a people, an entire civilization, and lead it to its downfall? In the last videos, Massilia had to fight big wars with Carthage and Rome just to survive. And through some luck, through some tactics, Massilia came on top and became the strongest power in the Mediterranean. And now being the strongest, Massilia no longer needed to have that many forts across the country, so forts started being demolished. With the new money that came free from demolishing the forts, Massilia started building new roads, new cities, new buildings, new wonders, especially in the parts that long were neglected because they served no purpose in the war. Historians would later call this era the Pax Massilia. And in this peaceful era, Massilia started trading with foreign countries and with former enemies like Carthage. With the new trade, also new technology arrived to Massilia. Like this was this weird, strange cult in the east that was using crosses everywhere, and because of them, Massilia learned crucifixion. Like, we actually didn't have the technology, like I just discovered it after Christianity appeared, so that's a thing, that's the lore now, that's how it works. The peaceful era had to come to an end. But to explain that, we have here a historian from this timeline.
The Massilian Republic was forged under the relentless pressure of formidable adversaries such as the Romans, Achaemenians, and Carthaginians. However, as these once mighty foes were gradually diminished to the point where they no longer posed a significant threat, Massilia faced a new dilemma. The Republic found itself compelled to identify new enemies to sustain its institutions and justify their existence to its citizens. Without such external pressures, the Republic risked an existential crisis, potentially leading to its own self-destruction.
In the Massilian Senate, there were three factions choosing three different paths forward. The first faction was the Democratic faction, and they aimed to liberate Greek cities that were still under Roman occupation. The oligarchic faction wanted to increase the power and wealth of the rich and the powerful. The Art Assembly consisted of traditionalist hardliners who wanted to preserve what they saw the Massilian identity was from all the weird new cultural influences that they thought were corrupting the Massilian morals. The Democratic faction was able to form a coalition with the oligarchs and take over the Senate. They would promise them the loot and wealth they would get from liberating the old Greek city-states in the south of Italy. The conflicts themselves were not much to talk about, because they were just like the previous wars with Rome, only easier. Because now we had more troops and they had less, and we just sent our troops to the east front to stop any reinforcements for the Romans, and a few legions south, and we took some land, and we had to repeat it only for 2 wars, and we took the whole southern peninsula, and also start investing a large portion of the money in building a navy, because now the eyes had to be set on the islands. Because they formed a large threat to the Massilian safety, the Romans could just use a navy and attack the whole underbelly of Massilia, and there was nothing to oppose it. One big problem that really would increase the price of the navy was that Massilia has not invested any cent for centuries in building a navy, only focusing on land-based warfare, because they had to fight the Gauls, the Romans, the Carthaginians, who all had land armies. Massilia only could fight the Romans if they had like 3 times or 4 times more boats than the Romans had. And the oligarchs didn't like that they had to flip the bill for so much for the navy, because that would leave them with less money from every conflict in the future. The Democratic faction saw that their support was waning in the Senate, and to win more votes and become more popular, they launched an invasion of Corsica and Sardinia, with hoping a swift victory would gain them support in the Senate again. At the beginning of the conflict, the Massilian navy was still untested, even though it was a bit larger. And to mitigate any potential loss of fighting the Romans on the water, the Massilians sent their armies and legions swiftly on the boats to Corsica and Sardinia, and started raiding and conquering the whole island. When the Roman legions arrived, instead of actually defending Corsica and Sardinia, they landed near Massilia itself, using the opportunity that there were no legions near the capital. Now the Massilians didn't want to force their navy to fight the Romans in open battle, leaving the troops on the islands no way back home. So to get troops, the legions from the Germanic border were sent south to protect the capital, leaving the whole front open. When the Roman legions arrived, the Massilian navy did a pincer move, attacking the Roman legion was still landing troops from behind, and having the Massilian legions kill all the troops that had landed. The battle was bloody and it took long, and it was a nail-biting battle, but luckily, Massilia won, not only on the land alone, but also on the sea, showing that Massilia's navy could power project itself over the Mediterranean and was a force to be reckoned with. And Massilia did win finally the war in Corsica and Sardinia, taking away the Roman landing point near their capital. Even that Massilia was victorious, it still had not the effect the democratic faction wanted. They wanted to have like a propaganda victory that they would defeat the Romans, but the blunder of leaving the legions back in Corsica would leave the population in Massilia quite angry, because they would leave their children, their husbands, their family members back on the island with no supply lines. Also, the Art Assembly, who wasn't happy with that the frontier was left undefended and a lot of migrants from Germania were just pouring in. And thirdly, the high cost of using a navy had the oligarchs also against the new government. With the anger against the democratic faction, the Traditionalist Assembly, or the Art Assembly, would use this anger to win the next election. And once in power, they start blaming like religious dissidents, like this strange cult from the east, for corrupting the Massilian morals. And they would seize their assets. While they were seizing the assets, they would, strangely enough, also have a lot of money to give the oligarchs to win them over and form a coalition, completely solidifying their control over the Senate. Quickly after, the assembly marched the troops back to the Rhine and then proceeded to cross the Rhine and invade Germania. Not to conquer the land, but to dismantle the Biturian Republic. They blamed the Biturians for allowing, according to some senators, plotting the whole migration into Massilia to steal its wealth. It was quite a brutal war, and many cities in Germania were put to the torch. And to have a little bit more context, here we have our resident historian again.
In truth, the war was not about halting migration, but rather provided a pretext for the new government to pillage and plunder cities in Germania, enriching themselves with gold. Paradoxically, the conflict inflicted such a devastation upon Germania that it spurred increased migration into Massilia. Today, historians contend that this episode signified the genuine onset of the migration era.
Having won the war, the land conquered by the Massilian Republic was given to the tribes in Germania. That would bring down the civilization level the Biturians built up back to tribalism, just as an extra punishment. Wait, those borders look like something that I remember. The Holy Roman Empire! It's better not to think of such horrible things. Let's continue with the video. And now, having won and having gotten richer, the traditionalists felt like they could do anything they wanted. That they had no limit to their power. So they start putting high tariffs or break all the trade deals with foreign countries. The voting base of the democratic faction. Because many cities that were being built in the Pax Massilia were in Iberia that needed like food imports from Carthage. Another group that felt like more powerful were the oligarchs, now even being wealthier. They started thinking, even if we are the minority in the Senate, we own most of the wealth here. So they started hatching a scheme to take control of the government. Luckily, the plot was stopped by the Archon, the ruler of the Massilian Republic. However, to stop the plot, the Archon needed an unprecedented ostracization, banning somebody from the whole republic. The biggest problem of this banning was that this guy was from an ancient, prominent, noble families in Massilia. This caused the whole coalition to break in a giant political crisis because even traditionalists who the hardliners were from culture and keeping things how they are, were completely against this. The oligarchs were against this because their plot was destroyed. So the whole ruling class just fell apart. And in the next elections, the Democratic faction won again. It became the next rulers of the Massilian Republic. The Democratic faction, who had their supporters in the colonies in Iberia, wanted to aid them again and reopen the trade deals with Carthage. However, Carthage didn't trust the Massilian government because it was flip-flopping between traditionalist or democratic from time to time. And the Democratic faction wasn't able to supply the food for the cities where they had the supporters, fearing that their supporters would flip once the traditionalists were able to recuperate their political chaos and form a new coalition. The Democratic faction thought of a new scheme. The idea was, if they don't want to trade the food, we have to get the food ourselves. Massilia at the moment had the strongest army in the Western Mediterranean, so they marched the legions towards Africa and made them cross the Pillars of Hercules and invaded the Atlas Mountains. The invasion was going well. While Macedonia would strike a truce, conquer some land, then once the truce expired, they would push further and further, closing in on the Carthaginian fertile lands. But then, something bad happened. A danger originating from the east, a darkness rising. It might have been less severe for Massilia if they had not gone to war. Because first, this darkness arrived into Carthage through merchant ships. Then once Massilia broke the truce and continued their war, the soldiers from Carthage were sent to the front lines. And once they arrived there, they spread the darkness and contact of blood and steel to the Massilian troops. Then quickly after, the Massilian troops got sick, stricken by an unknown plague. The war could not continue, a new truce was broken, and the soldiers were sent home or to their colonies across the Grand Republic. This only would bring down the entire Republic within a few weeks, and the Plague era had begun. And now back to our resident historian to tell more. Why are you wearing a face mask?
Huh? What about the plague?
That was like 1900 years ago.
Oh yeah, right. The first effects of the plague were that all trade ceased in the Republic and no more food was supplied to the cities. This was devastating to the urban areas, especially those in Italia and the Alps. The cities in the Alps had been supplied with more food that was native to the region to form a bulwark during the Roman-Massilian Wars.
Most people in large cities fled to the countryside, especially to Britannia, which had been built up with a lot of infrastructure as a plan B if the Romans won the previous wars. However, this whole exodus to the countryside made it harder to tax people. So we started losing lots and lots of money. And then we start implementing austerity. How do people say it in the UK? Austerity.
Austerity measures.
Thank you. Austerity measures were instituted, cutting expenses of wages, infrastructure, the army, and the beloved navy the Democratic faction had made. So austerity measures made people really angry to the government. They started wanting to leave from their own nations, or they would flee even more and not pay their taxes. So we increased the wages of the army. And we couldn't really pay them, so the army was sent down and they would plunder the land. They would burn down Massilian lands to make sure it stayed under Massilian control. The army started killing its own citizens. And once Massilia captured those rebels, they would be turned into interns and work on plantations, not voluntarily, but this could be seen as the precursor of the whole serfdom in the early start of the medieval era. A little side note, just not to take up the emotion, alright? Try to keep it as a documentary a little bit, the style of this video. But around this time, when everything was going worse for the country and Massilia was just collapsing the economy, we had more people interacting with the whole live streams. And they would stick longer, and they would make up stories happening during the campaign. Most of the custom lore was made about like new legions So one of them was the silver shields, a lot of heavy infantry, and not much else, like a little bit of cavalry, but especially like silver shields from Alexander the Great. Then there is the Misrapian Legion. This was like a light legion to go fast, go quickly, and catch all the traders and bring them back to the plantations to work in their slave internships. The Legion of the Fish, who is especially modeled after the Winged Hussars, who has like a lot of heavy cavalry to punch hard and do a lot of shock damage. The Cursed Sorrows, who is a lot of cool elephants who can just trample all the enemies. And then there is the Legion of the Royalists. We are not a monarchy, and there was a reason I remember why we called them Royalists, but I forgot. It's not written down. I think it was because of a local king that we conquered, and they became part of the Massilian Republic, but I cannot confirm this. If somebody wants to rewatch all the streams, be my guest. But there is just some royalists, but it's forgotten to history why they are called royalists. And then there were many more legions. And from this point on, more and more custom lore is made by chat. We have a whole Discord about it. If you're interested, like to making your own noble house in Crusader Kings, you can just join there. And we might add it somewhere in the world. The plague is finally gone. We wanted to reignite the war with Carthage, but the whole tactical or geopolitical situation why declaring the war had changed too. Because Carthage now and Egypt are both the breadbaskets of the Mediterranean, being able to outproduce anybody else with food. And during the plagues, they were the ones that suffered least from all the hunger and trade collapse. Because they had so much in common and had so many enemies on the frontier, they decided to join together and now we're in an alliance. So declaring war against Carthage would mean that we had to declare war against Ptolemaic Egypt. Nevertheless, we needed the food, so we declared the war. We marched the legions to the frontier and we crossed it. In the last war, we had well-disciplined, well-organized, standardized legions. Now we had the local legions, hardened by pillage and war. Still, they were the strongest army in the world, and they would march close in on Carthage. Once they were at the walls of the once capital of the Carthaginians, something happened. Something you would not believe happened. Our legion, outnumbering the Carthaginians, was defeated. No other than by Hannibal. Like, Hannibal appeared in our world. What the hell is that? Hannibal appeared in our world. But we wanted to take the city, right? We wanted to win. So I sent 2 legions. The legions outnumbering Hannibal to stop him. Hannibal destroyed them. Still being outnumbered. You know what? Screw it. Screw Carthage. Screw victory. I'm going to catch you, Hannibal. And then we got Hannibal. We defeated him in battle. But he survived and he ran away. And then the manhunt had started. Like, I would exterminate him. But I was not able to. He escaped. He didn't catch him. And then the Egyptians came with their fleet. And they landed in the south of Italia. So now we forcefully had to march a legion there too. And then we just organized ourselves again. Like, okay, sure. We go for Carthage. And we took Carthage. And once Carthage was taken by the Massilians, they burned it down to the ground. And I blame chat. Because as a YouTuber, I never take full responsibility. It was chat that encouraged me. It's chat that caused me to commit this war crime. I did not want to do this war crime, alright? It's all chat's responsibility. Because that's how it works as a YouTuber. They salted the city. I pressed the button, but I was just following orders. And Nuremberg is really far away in the future. So this is still a legitimate argument. Also in the east, during the plague era, a strange cult with crosses in Macedonia went to Athens and burned down the Acropolis with a giant statue to Athena. To the traditionalists, this could not go unpunished, even that this happened during the plague era. They wanted to have revenge. First, they made a temple to Athena in the Massilian Grand Republic. Then, they marched the armies to the Macedonian-Massilian border in Illyria. They invaded. Because clearly, showing what happened in Athens, it was proof that the Macedonians had no right to rule over the Greek cities. They were no longer the peacekeepers of the ancient Greek values. This clearly now belonged to the strongest country in the Mediterranean, Massilia. And with that right, they invaded. While moving the Massilian troops over the frontier, we would build like this giant frontier line in the Macedonian mountains, creating choke points. Thinking we had won and defeated the majority of the Macedonian troops, and being a bit too cocky, we sent half of our legions down south to liberate the Greek cities. But when that was happening, the Macedonians sent in more reinforcements, and the legions of the Macedonians were just larger, and the technology and the tactics of the Macedonians was great. Still, we were able to defend the choke points we had captured. When seeing more and more Macedonian phalanxes on the front lines, we just made a truce. And we used the time of the truce to build forts, just as we had done with the Romans, to reinforce the lines, build roads through Illyria towards Hellas. And then, when the truce was over, we invaded Hellas. We liberated Hellas. And once the Massilian legions marched into Athens, we would proclaim it to be again a center of democracy and liberate it from the tyrannical Macedonian monarchy. Even to put on more wounds in the salt, we went to the Acropolis that had burned down, and we went and we found the silver shields that Alexander the Great himself had given to the Athenians, and we gave it to our own silver shields. In a Germanic border, the people moving across the border causing I shouldn't say migration crisis because of demonetization or YouTube, I don't know, burying the video with our algorithm. The people moving in from Germania would move in like with armies and with like raiders. And normally we were able to stop them, but now the armies being tied down in Macedonia, they start moving in and start burning down important infrastructure. Even if we are capable of stopping them, every city they burned down, they would kill too many pops. To stop the migration crisis, the Traditions Assembly thought of a new idea. What if we invade Germania, but not like last time where we burned down all the cities and all the infrastructure. This time we go in there. We move the frontier, we create a buffer zone, and in this buffer zone we start building infrastructure. So we moved in there, we declared war against all the Germanic tribes at the same time. And we moved the border from the Rhine River to the Elbe River, and then we built a new line of fortresses from the Elbe River until the Alps. Even though the plague had left Massilia, and we had stopped the barbarian raiders by moving the frontier, the trend of people leaving the city was still going on. This was also partly because of a mod that we are using to model late antiquity. The mod is down in the description. It also adds the Christianity and the whole events like the plague. But people leaving the city would cause the infrastructure that we had put a lot of money into it to be not used. So we had less of the bonuses were in effect, less tax money, and we had to reintroduce the austerity measures, even that we were not in an external crisis. We had to do new trade deals, we started building big infrastructure projects just to raise the civilization level so people would move back to the cities. Sadly, this was not enough. And I even put on a sign, the economy is fake, we just ignore it. And then the worst of the worst happened. The worst of the worst. The biggest insult to Massilia. The Irish built a pyramid. The big pyramid of Tara or something. Just look at it. It's giant. It's an insult that they show, oh, we are rich. You guys are poor. You have an economic crisis. Rallying together with Chet, we decided, screw the poor. F the poor.
How does this vote? Fuck the poor! Good.
We going to ignore you. We are going to build giant monuments. We are gonna build pyramids. And when we don't have enough money, we just strip the country. So that's what we did. We built a couple of giant pyramids across the country. Some of the pyramids were based on the legions, like every legion would get its own cool monument. We would destroy some Roman monuments so we could build more of our own monuments. It was great to ignore the poor. But maybe we should have paid attention. Because focusing on the pyramids might not be the smartest thing. Because the worst happened then. A new plague had come. The chat dubbed it Rosa. We were already under austerity measures. So there was no way we could maintain the country. The things we did to try to stay alive is to increase the tariffs of trade. To focus all the food exports from all the regions within Massilia to the capital. So we would keep the capital alive of Massilia. All the other cities, be damned, alright? We were already to a point where we didn't care about the poor and the pleb. Now we don't care about the external provinces. The country started self-cannibalizing. This was actually a good thing. It kept us alive. The more we increase taxes, the more let people starve, the more people start rebelling. The more people rebelling would mean that we could send in the legions to burn and pillage. The more burning and pillaging we did, the more interns we got and the more money we got. The more interns, the less complaints about working, the less rights people had. More food could be produced. With more food, we could let the capital Massilia live another day. And it became so horrible, the plague, that actually provinces start being completely depopulated. No people living in it. Like, completely empty. Not only with us, but also in other countries. Like in Macedonia or in Egypt. So that was actually good, because we had one last goal. And that was to conquer Ionia and Anatolia. Because in Ionia, that's the original place where the settlers of Massilia came from. So we thought we had a claim over it. We couldn't not colonize specifically the region they came from, but pretty close. We started forming some colonies from depopulated cities in Anatolia. At one point, at least, this plague would end, but the country was still in a devastated state, and the new colonies settled in Anatolia would cause a border conflict, where we wanted to defend our colonies. Macedonia was like, hey, this is our land, get out of here. And Egypt decided to, Macedonia seems to be in a weakened state, and we still have like the Nile River, so we are good on food. Egypt started invading Anatolia. We wanted to have Ionia, so we sent down our armies. So with the plagues, the war, and the corruption, could clearly believe you were living at the end times. And just as prophecy from the east, horsemen of the apocalypse came from the Pontic steppe. People believing they were sent by the gods to punish the corrupt, to punish the unjustified Massilian civilization that had no right ruling over the people. The Danae, horse lords, had come. They completely wiped out the Romans. They snuffed them out, showing the real danger they are. They would come close to the frontier. And this is about the time where we convert into Crusader Kings. So before converting, we'll still show you guys like how the world looks like right before the end. This is the end day. We will go around 400 AD converting the game. This is our Massilia. As you can see here, the last bits were a lot of barbarian invasion. We have the Danae horse lords here. We have the Mesopotamian Empire. Well, that's pretty cool that they appeared. Egypt became really large after the two plagues because they were able to like not die with their food production here and dominate their neighbors. They were actually losing to the Seleucids that were like the guys before the Mesopotamians here and to the Macedonians. But once the plagues happened, they just became large and strong. We have the Mauryan Empire or Mauria over here. We have the Avidians here. We have still the tribes over here, the Germanic tribes, and we have the Irish here being in Ireland with their Irish pyramids. This is the religious map. So we have Hellenic, we have Christianity over here, we have Christianity over there, we have some Christianity down here, and I know Christianity will become a bit larger here after the game is converted. We have Hepatic over here, the Germanic religions over here, some Druids still over here, and also in Ireland. So Christianity went east instead of going west in our timeline. This is the population, so if you guys are interested, this is how the world is divided. A lot of people live down here, pretty cool. A lot of people live down here, so that's also pretty interesting, I think. This is a bit overpopulated here, I don't know what that is going on about. Now, culture-wise, we can see the Romans have been conquered by the Danae. We can see the Massilians are pretty large, and the conversion mod will make them into Greek. So that's a bit weird, to be fair. So I will split up the culture of the Massilian culture into smaller bits. So over here we have like Punic, and we could say like there is like some Punic mixed with Massilian culture. The same over here, but this is like the heartlands of the Carthaginians. We can say over here they mixed with the Gauls, here with the Germanics people, because if you see here, there are still Germanic people living there. And here, the Celts. And we can say that because of the exodus of the Romans in the plagues to the countryside, but especially to Britannia, that the Romans mixed with the local Celts and the Britons, and the Massilians were like the people living in the big cities, and that's like a mixed culture, something like that. Like the closer you are to the capital, to the heartland, the more Hellenic you are, the further away, the more you take on from the local cultures there. And yeah, that's the culture. Let's see, is there one more interesting bit? This, trade, development, opinion, everybody hates me, government, republic. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. I just can tell you guys, if you like this this channel, feel free to like and subscribe, comment, and whatever. And we will stream. That's something I will do, and at least you can follow the content there, and the next video will be there in the future. I'm still going to make it.